Hello and welcome to the Delphian Podcast.
Delphian is an artist-led nomadic gallery focusing on emerging and early career artists.
Each episode will feature a different art world practitioner, from artists and gallerists to collectors and curators.
If you like today's episode, please like, share and subscribe.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Delphian Podcast. I'm Nick J.S. Thompson and with me is Benjamin Murphy.
Hello. So today our guest is Charlie Mills, who is 1/3 of the loose curatorial group Collective Ending, who are currently in the midst of their year-long series of exhibitions entitled Absinthe, which is housed in the Spit and Sawdust pub in South London. As well as this, you work a few roles, I suppose, for another one of our favourite South London galleries, which is Halle Berry. Hello, how are you? Thank you for coming.
I'm good. Hello, thank you for having me.
That's all right.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into curating. What were your intentions when you were starting out?
Well, I mean, first, I don't really actually think of myself as a curator at all. I mean, I came to London to study art. I did a foundation at Camberwell, but it just happened to be the year that they amalgamated Camberwell, Wimbledon and Chelsea foundations into one building at Wilson Road, Camberwell, which was just a nightmare, as you can imagine, because a room for 100 people turned into a room for 400 people. Contact hours was slashed, it was kind of like an administrative crisscross. So, I mean, for better or worse, I kind of decided not to pursue art further than that. So I went to Goldsmiths and did history of art. Just because, as many people do, they have this nebulous passion for the arts, but they kind of have no real sense of where that can go. Mm-hmm. So I thought history of art was probably the best bet, just get some kind of historical, conceptual grounding. And Goldsmiths was all contemporary. I mean, you learn from basically the beginning of modernism forward, but really focused on postmodernism forward. And that was super attractive to me. I mean, obviously I love all art of all genres and all ages, but I had a particular kind of fascination with all things kind of weird and indescribable. So I went to Goldsmiths, was never really into kind of producing shows. I just really liked writing. I was super into, as Goldsmiths kind of is, very long jargon-riddled theoretical essays about things. And I loved that, but eventually I kind of, it just wasn't really giving me what I wanted in terms of some kind of physical result at the end of the work. You kind of send it to someone and then they might say, oh yeah, I've read that was lovely, but that was about it.
Yeah.
So I got into curating because I actually started working, funnily enough, as a trainee at Tendencies 5 years ago, which is where I still am now. But and that really gave me some kind of hands-on experience in kind of some of the most straightforward roles like front of house stewarding. But also I did some kind of backstage production, and teching, and my first kind of flavour of installing artworks. For those of you that don't know, Tendencies is this huge space on the top 4 floors of the Peckham multi-storey car park, and every year between May and September we have a kind of pool of huge site-specific sculptures there. And so I started doing a little bit of teching, working on it, and through that I got really interested in the production of artworks and exhibitions. And did a show, the first show I did, the first of the kind of 3 shows I've done was a show at the Art Academy on Walworth Road with a friend and artist, Lewis Henderson, called Slapdash for No Cash. That was in September last year, and that was the first show I ever kind of did. It lasted
curated, you mean?
Yeah, that one was slightly more curated. There was a concept, and we were selecting artists, and we kind of wrote an essay for it. I guess that was more kind of curatorially driven. And then that was it basically. Did that. It was super good. It lasted 2 days. As most of these kind of pop-up things do.
Yeah.
And then moved on, and I was just working at Tendencies and Halle Berry, and there was a show that I kind of co-curated, I guess, at the gallery, the Halle Berry, with Ralph Hunter Menges, who's a great painter. So we'd met each other working at Bold Tendencies, and we'd been invited by Halle Berry to kind of propose a show for the gallery, and we did. It was called the Unlimited Dream Company. It was 8 artists, all of them very young, mostly London based. And that was kind of a huge success, and I think that was kind of the turning point where I got really interested. The Slapdash for No Cash show had been a huge success, but it wasn't that it wasn't successful. It was a kind of smaller operation basically. And then when we were working at the gallery, obviously the kind of footfall and the interest and the press, and like it was this huge deal. And I just started working at the gallery, and it was kind of like a windrush of things, of having to like learn how to talk about a show properly.
Yeah.
Learn how to talk about a show differently to various people. You have to talk about it very differently when you have kind of students come, when you have a collector come, when you have someone from the press come, when you're speaking to another gallerist. You have to become incredibly dexterous with your language and know how to talk about art in the correct ways to kind of get the desired effect. And I think that was what I found so interesting, the fact that I could have this one show, but every day I would have to approach it in a completely different way. So that, it did get me really on the kind of the hype of curating, but as I say, I still wouldn't call myself a curator. I think there are so many curators out there that do incredible work. It's their kind of specialism. Really what interested me was kind of producing and organising and bridging, and maybe you can describe that as curating. Some people probably would, but
I think I would, yeah.
I think I have this kind of like archaic understanding of the curator as like the specialist in 18th century Japanese ceramics, that takes care of his collection. But I just got super into like basically introducing people to other people and introducing work to other people and just making that kind of stuff happen.
Being a connector.
Yeah, an interlocutor. That was kind of like how I saw it. So it was actually by chance that this kind of whole collective ending thing happened. James Kappa, who's part of the 3 alongside myself and Billy Fraser, he is represented by the Halle Berry Gallery. He makes these kind of large hydraulic mobile sculptures, like really big. He's currently making a work called Mud Skipper, which is going to
That's a boat, right?
Yeah, it's a boat that's like 12 meters long, 11 tons. And is going to sail down the Thames, date TBC, but I think next springtime, and walk out of the Thames onto Battersea Jetty.
Like Shed Boat Shed, almost.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing he's involved in. But anyway, I'd had to do some work early at the gallery and kind of visiting his studio and helping him write some text about his work, provide some reference points and, but he just gave me a call one day and was like, "Oh, Charlie, you should come have a look at this project. It's really interesting. I think you'd love it." And I honestly had no idea what he was on about. That was all he said. And then the next week I was invited to go to the pub, this Spit and Sawdust pub on the Old Ken Road, and James was there having a pint with this guy that I'd never seen before in my life, and it was Billy Fraser, who since that day I've spoken to all day, every day, for 12 months straight, in this kind of strange love affair. But he kind of just said, because we got to know each other well and I'd helped kind of write some stuff about his work, he thought I might be interested in this potential project. And he knew Billy because Billy's studio was opposite, and Billy's a fantastic painter, amongst many other things, but also curates shows in his spare time too. So he did a really interesting project called Extended Cool, and that was in various iterations, and that was all housed inside red telephone boxes around London. Super kind of eccentric approach to exhibition making, but it was a huge success. And so James invited me and Billy down to the pub, where James knew their kind of unofficial janitor who lived upstairs above the pub, who he had kind of fabricated for back in the day, installing kitchens in Bermondsey. And long story short, we kind of got invited by the pub to do a year's worth of shows and exhibitions across their They have a huge downstairs and upstairs, a terrace, a huge smoking garden out the back. And yeah, that was how kind of Absinthe was born, which is this huge project, which has just come to an end.
Isn't there one more?
No, the pub are renovating.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Which is a massive shame. It's been going for 8 months, and it was supposed to be 12. But it was inbuilt to the very fabric of the project that basically the pub were in a kind of troublesome fiscal position.
Okay.
So they'd invited us and given us this huge space in kind and a lot of other support in kind, and also some kind of just generous support. And as far as their kind of agenda was, we were there to kind of bring people to the pub and make it exciting, give it a culture. And that's what we did for 8 months. And it was super successful. And, we did these 3 huge shows. Every private view had over 800 people come.
Wow.
Like really insane numbers. We were having events fortnightly at one point, which when everyone's working full-time jobs was really, really hard, but really, really successful. But yeah, they've had to kind of make a decision now to renovate. So show 3 was deinstalled on Sunday just passed, and that's the end of our life in the pub. But we have a new project that we're now working on immediately, straight away. It's just fine. I kind of thought that I was going to have like a moment's gasp to rest, but we've now managed to kind of secure this big warehouse down in Deptford.
Oh, amazing.
Which had it's called Artworks Creekside, and it used to have some studios there. Billy got kicked out of his studio like 4 days before the opening of the second show.
Yeah, we were there last week.
I think we were there,
Oh, in Deptford?
Yeah.
Oh, great. So you've seen it?
Rhiannon's studio there,
Yeah, fantastic. So managed to go there looking for a studio, found these kind of 12 pod-like units with one artist there, saying that he was fed up and he was leaving. So through a kind of minutiae of conversations with the landlord and buildings manager, they managed to secure some investment from them, bulldoze all of the studios that were originally there, and we're currently in the process of rebuilding 12 studios and a gallery space there. And we have all the artists confirmed to move in, Rhiannon being one of them.
It's an incredible space that I really like it.
Yeah, so hopefully that'll all be up and running sometime early October. But so it's a heck of a lot of work. We've got to literally re-concrete the floor. Yeah. Which is like a kind of like a heavy industry at this point. But we've got James Capper with his kind of industrial studio of scary looking
heavy
machinery that we can call upon.
So something that you kind of mentioned or alluded to, which I think would be interesting to bring up, it sounds like a lot of what you have done was almost unplanned. It's like, say, Absinthe was this chance meeting almost, or how do I put it? It wasn't something that was like a long planning process, and it's not something that you decided long in advance and then started working on. Same with this studios that you're opening up. Did you at any point feel like you were kind of winging it? Because I think a lot of us in the art world do kind of wing it a lot of the time, and it's not something that people are ever that willing to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, straightforwardly, yeah. I think that I actually felt most like I was winging it when I was writing about art.
Yeah.
When I was at uni, like when I was first trying to conceptualize like what I thought art was, and when I was first trying to write kind of historical essays, like I really didn't know what I was talking about. It's super hard, I think, until you spend like a lot of physical time with artists and like in the art world, expanded kind of term.
Yeah.
It's very hard to just like go from being a kind of sprightly 16-year-old doing some paintings at GCSE, wanting to go to uni and study and learn about art, to actually really getting what it's about. Like, I think there's a really steep learning curve that you go through when you start trying to produce shows and like actually have to deal with artists and like what they think art is, what they think is important to their practice. So I was super winging it when I was talking about art, But the beauty of the obfuscating language of kind of art theory is that everyone gets away with it because no one understands what it's saying anyway. But I definitely think the shows the Art Academy and at Halle Berry were less winging it because the first one was really small in scale. It was fairly straightforward. It was like we have a theme, slapdash for no cash. It's about artists that are using kind of found materials and like reinventing technology. It had a kind of quite clear direction. So there was, there are only so many ways you could go wrong. The hang's not right, or like something doesn't turn up in time, or all that kind of stuff. The show at the gallery was the same in a way. Kind of Ralph was really, really important mentor actually at that point. And also Hannah was also a really important mentor, and Tiana and the rest of the team at the gallery. Because what I had at that point was a lot of friends I'd been to uni with who were really good artists. But in terms of like doing a proper show with all of the surrounding kind of content, I really had no idea what I was doing. I was suggesting some artists I thought were really cool, and they might be interested in, and maybe some of their audiences would be interested in, and also maybe would get them some new audiences. But in terms of like how to really, create a list of works, how to create like price listings, how to, communicate with people, it really wasn't something that I knew how to do. And there was a really fast learning curve, just being like put into rooms where you suddenly had to deal with that stuff. So I learned a lot doing that. And then when it came to this really big absinthe project, the whole thing has in one way or another been winging it. We've had to deal with a really just a vast project that is way bigger than any of us, or even bigger than the sum of its parts. Like, we've really had to go the extra mile in terms of getting the people involved in the project to help create it, right? And that was one of the driving kind of philosophies of it anyhow, was that there'd be a sense of ownership between all of the people that were, exhibiting in it. So all of the artists that showed works had the opportunity to do events. We did a residency that they're invited to. We actually have another project. There's a black box exhibition space at Farnham University that has just promised 2 shows and support both financially and with materials and workshops for absinthe artists exclusively.
Oh, that's great.
And various other things, but the point being that it was such a big project, it literally couldn't have just been achieved by Billy, James, and I. It took a heck of a lot of people working together to make it something. Also, we're dealing with the kind of infrastructure and politics of the pub itself, which, although all the people that worked there were, incredibly nice and incredibly supportive, there are also parts where communication is like not wholly clear. We're dealing with contemporary art, which is super weird, and it takes kind of a while to get what its aims are. And obviously the pub has a very simple prerogative of people in the pub
buying
money.
Drinks.
And art people are famously scrupulous in how much they spend.
especially on drinks.
Pubs. Yeah, so
we free all the time.
we keep on getting people there, but they just wouldn't be spending their money. So there are really difficult kind of moments where you're having to, the first time dealing with parties who had no idea about what you were doing, basically. There are super complex points. Say big projects we do at Bold Tendencies, where you'll be doing one site-specific installation, and there'll be 4 or 5 different partners supplying either in-kind support or financial support, and kind of marrying them all together is complex. But most of them are in the game of producing one way or another, and in whether it's the performing arts or the fine arts, they've usually done a project where they're dealing with kind of creativity in that sense. Whereas the pub, when we first turned up, they had vintage posters from the 1960s, badly framed with cables hanging everywhere. There wasn't the same kind of thing, and there was a lot of work that we had to do in the first instance. It took like 6 months of prep to even open the first show, because there was so much kind of internal preparation we had to do to then communicate to the pub for them to get on board with what we were doing and basically convince them to be as liberal as possible with what we were allowed to do. Because when it started off, it was like, okay, you can hang a show. But, you know, their idea of a show was paintings on a wall, right? It wasn't like site-specific installations like drilled through the cross beams and hung like really expensive ceramics from the ceiling, you know. So that we had to really like get across to them how important and valuable that could be to their pub, and you know, that was difficult. But
that goes back to something we were talking about annoyingly before we started recording, about the limitations that certain projects place upon you and how you can use those to force you to work in ways that you wouldn't naturally do so, and how that can be quite beneficial.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it's definitely true, as you said, we were talking about it earlier, so as I said before, there was this great kind of idea from one of the artists I spoke to called Matt Cobson, who we commissioned at Bold Tendencies this year, where he said that every time he creates an artwork, basically he has an idea or a concept, and then the struggle of creating the artwork is just this kind of like bare hand wrestling match to get that concept to become a physical thing in whatever form it ends up taking. And, you know, working at Bold Tendencies has been a great eye-opener to this kind of thing, being that it's a kind of open-air rooftop brutalist car park. I mean, it's really like bleak in many ways in terms of kind of installing things. It's super difficult. The weather plays such an emphasized role on what you can even
Everything's
do.
going to get damaged, right?
Well, hopefully not. But yeah, you have to account for, you know, like really like straightforward things like it's going to rain. What's going to happen to your work when it rains?
Yeah.
It's going to be windy. Is it going to suddenly become a sail and fly off? Like, even in the sun, is this concrete going to bake so much that it just splinters and cracks and demolishes?
Are any of them going to end up being lightning rods if there's a thunderstorm?
Yeah, precisely. Oh my God, can you imagine? I hope not. But yeah, that's the kind of like really like, you know, basic thing you have to think about. I was speaking to Helen Faby the other day, who's the head of curatorial program at Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and they had a huge artwork once, which was I can't remember the name of the artist now. Have to find it afterwards. But two huge helicopter propeller blades in the roof of a kind of barn, which were spinning, and you basically walk underneath them. You know, I mean, that's like terrifying as sin as an artwork in itself. But they had a really, like 2 days before the opening, they had someone come in, complete, wasn't involved in the project, was just kind of coming to see the show, and was like, oh, have you thought about the kind of rotation waves? It creates a certain kind of frequency.
Oh no.
Like a very specific frequency, which would mean that basically the propeller blades would very slowly move out of joint, and then as soon as they move out of joint, they can suddenly go out of joint.
Oh wow.
And which is something like no one in their production team had even thought would be a thing. So they had to, the day before the opening, have someone sit there for 24 hours straight with a red laser pointing from the floor to the centre of the propeller blade. And if it moved a millimetre, they would have had to cancel the show.
Wow.
I mean, thankfully it didn't. But it was this thing of like, oh my God, there are all these very weird invisible phenomena that could cancel like anything you're doing. But I mean, on a slightly more uplifting note, like it is those strange things that often make people have to become really ingenious.
Ingenious.
No.
Genius.
Well, let's go for genius. Genius with what they're having to create, right? And I have so much respect for people that work in kind of site-specific and installation works, because I mean, it is a complete nightmare to do. Hats off to them.
So with collective ending, you sort of focus on early career and emerging artists, a bit like Delphian, really. What is it about the demographic that sort of appeals to you about showing that sort of art and that sort of career level?
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I would love to have some Donald Judd sculptures in my shows, don't get me wrong. But I think that, I mean, it's probably the same with you guys, and like there are loads of people out there doing this kind of stuff. Like there's so many project spaces in South London that are kind of devoted to this kind of thing. It's like Dirty House in Peckham, Dat Eagle Art. It's a really interesting collective doing a lot of stuff at this kind of level of career at the moment. And really, I think that it's basically people do this because no one else is doing it right. That's like the fundamental axis of it is that galleries, I mean, in the kind of late 80s, there just wasn't an art scene in London, right? I mean, you had Marine Paley doing a thing in East, you had Cork Street, and you had kind of Anthony Doffey, and that was literally the London art scene, the London art market. And then obviously through the 90s things exploded, and opportunities became huge for artists. I mean, it was still super competitive and like fraught, and no one, it's not just to say that if you became an artist you'd immediately become rich, but like there were way more opportunities emerging for artists to like do things. In Britain, funnily enough, I mean, we'd been like to the point of xenophobic about art for, you know, centuries. Since the Reformation, we really saw anything that was kind of, you know, beautiful or ornate as this kind of popery, and there was a huge period after, I think, Charles I, where they actually destroyed thousands and thousands of churches around England in this kind of great purge of art. But anyway, there was a kind of huge explosion. Art became cool and known in London, and, you know, it's not actually in so many countries you have kind of contemporary art like in all of the kind of tabloid headlines, right? That's actually quite like a unique thing, and Britain really kind of paved the way actually for that. But then what's happened with galleries now is that it's really just become so polarized. Kind of big blue chip galleries dominating the market and the scene, and they will increasingly so deal with younger artists, which they never used to really do. So they'll start to, you know, bring in artists at an earlier stage of their career, which is normally where your kind of focus section freeze commercial galleries will be working with artists. So they're kind of at a loss. They're having to, like, you know, really rabble together talent and do well at supporting it and managing it to be successful. But they're really being pushed out massively by the huge galleries. And then where is it that kind of, you know, recent grad, emerging, mid-career, however you want to kind of define it, artists, you know, how do they survive and exhibit their work and support one another and, yeah, do their thing, basically. And that's where we all like to think of ourselves as playing a role. You know, we try and use what we have, our skills, our services, our connections, whatever it is that we've kind of amassed that might be useful for artists to help them do that. Which is, I think, a really fun thing to do also. I mean, like, it's kind of this vicariously beautiful thing, right? If you just spend your time with artists, you know, it's just a great thing. And I think that's the reason why most of us do it, is because we love art, we love artists. And even if we're not kind of talented enough with a brush, although we are seeing behind some of your incredible works. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that there's something to be gained personally for us guys doing it. You know, there's a reason we're in it for ourselves also, in a very simple way. Like, we get something out of spending our time here with these people, but also, you know, no one else is going to support these people unless you basically self-organise and do these things yourselves. And I think that's the reason that we're all kind of going for it.
There seems to be a lot of DIY, unconventional, artist-led projects happening at the moment. I was wondering, do you think that is a product of almost the democratization of the art world because of social media? It's now so much easier for artists to put things together, to get people there, to connect with buyers, etc., etc.
Well, yeah, yes and no. I think that, like, project spaces and all that kind of stuff has always existed. You know, like, in the kind of late 80s, like, the punks were doing their own shows, like, all over the place in London and Camden, wherever. and really, I mean, the growth of those things has been in parallel with the growth of art, and especially contemporary art as a market, really, as an industry, as a thing which has some value in this country, is growing alongside that. I mean, so insofar as kind of, and it's actually probably gone down, since the kind of New Labour years, the more that housing, abandoned properties get bought up, squatters' rights was being kind of attacked, was a huge blow for the kind of ability of DIY things to happen. So in a way, it kind of probably decreased, I imagine, as much as it was increasing. Or at least it was increasing, but it was getting harder to do it. And I think that with regards to social media, I mean, it definitely does help. Yeah, I mean, quite straightforwardly, like most people will have, will have a segment of their network that they met on Instagram now. Yeah. Like 100%. I mean, even people like Hansel or Gobris talk about finding new talent on Instagram. It's gone to this point, where, I'm perpetually talking to people on Instagram. Yeah. It's like one of the major resources. And although I go to shows and clearly that's still like the better way, I think we can say, of like interacting with artworks, interacting with artists, meeting people, etc. There definitely is something which it adds, I guess, to a better sense of kind of broader connection between people. For instance, like you could connect with an artist that lives and works in Paris in a second that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. Whether or not it actually helps kind of DIY projects have more success, I don't really know. I mean, Dat Eagle is a really good example of this. They're like kind of Vanessa and Martin, this duo, and they do a lot of studio visits for their website, and they've started doing more and more shows. And they have a huge social media presence. It's something that's kind of like defined a lot of what they've done so far. And but I'm not sure how much that can contribute to really their shows being better than they are, or like how they acquire spaces to do their shows, or even like how many people turn up to the shows. I think that it does help propel them as a brand, or one as a brand. I think that very few people would even understand what collective ending was without our website and our Instagram page. Otherwise, they just know it as Absinthe. Or they know, that's the thing that like Charlie, Billy and James are up to. I think that in terms of developing some kind of recognisable name to projects that are happening, then it definitely helps in that sense. I mean, social media is really weird in our world. Like, I spoke to someone recently who was writing something for The Economist about is the age of the gallerist over, because basically artists can just connect with collectors straight over Instagram to sell their work direct. There's no need for a gallery.
I'm writing a similar thing too
really?
For the upcoming Delphian book. Yeah.
What's your take on it?
I'm writing it more as a exploration of the idea, so I haven't fully decided yet.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of using the exercise of writing it as to explore the ideas surrounding it. So.
I think that it definitely doesn't spell the age of the gallerist.
I think maybe it suggests that the role of the gallery has changed.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that galleries are basically
they're not the gatekeepers anymore.
Yeah, they're not the gatekeepers. They're more just like service providers. Like there are things that they can offer an artist at various points in their career. That kind of, I guess that old term kind of representing is slightly like out of date in that sense, because they're not the gatekeepers anymore. But they do provide services that can't be matched, I don't think, unless you're like an incredibly busybody artist that wants to like run their whole, it really is. There's a lot that galleries still do, and I don't think kind of social media will ever usurp that in a way. But I think that it probably does have like an overall net positive role in kind of the DIY scene, so to speak.
So if you had unlimited time, money, space, what would be your one ideal project you'd love to do? If there was no restrictions.
Wow. I think it would be too much to kind of figment out my own idea, but in terms of things I've been to recently that really kind of felt like that, I think one of the best shows that I've been to ever was Infinity Mix at 180 The Strand. Do you guys go? It was like a huge, it's like a huge warehouse just next to Somerset House. And they did a huge show a couple of years ago called Infinity Mix, which was exclusively video art.
All right.
And then they've done several shows since. One was Stranger Futures.
Is it where Laz did Brutal?
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same place.
Yeah. And that was just epic. I remember there was this article on Freeze recently. I mean, it was a quite like on the nose, trite article about Berghain, I think, and Berghain's relationship to contemporary art.
That sounds very Vice.
Yeah, maybe it was Vice. I don't know that. But the premise was that for all art press releases talk about kind of these utopic spaces beyond gender and class and race, and like you've never felt more classed, raised, or gendered when you're in private views and blue chip galleries, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I wrote my thesis on rave music in the UK from 1988 to 1994. When I did my master's in cultural studies, so I was super and always have been into music, and I think that the point of this kind of Freeze article was to say that nightclubs really are actually venues where you can kind of get to this kind of, at least kind of like get closer to this sense of identity, which is, sloughs off all the things of kind of race, identity, class, gender. And what Infinity Mix did, that show, was basically create an art exhibition which was attuned to those principles. So there was absolutely no linear format to how you were supposed to go through the show. It was a genuine labyrinth warehouse. With no directions, just I think it was something like 45 major video artworks. Wow. From like Mine Creed to John Akenfroa, these like huge works. And people, it was one of those things, as cliche as it sounds, like you go in there for 6 hours and you kind of forget how long you've gone in there, and you'd watch something on repeat for 2 hours. You kind of forget where you were. And I always used to think that people were almost kind of like being disingenuous when they said they kind of had those experiences in art galleries. I don't know. I do find art really, inspiring in that sense. But have I ever looked at Rothko and like cried? Probably not. And like, if you have, was that a real
I'm going to go
experience?
on a limb here and say that the people who claim they have, a lot of them are probably lying.
Yeah, and if they have those, because they've gone into it with a preconceived idea
Thinking,
that this should be this really emotional experience. Right? But that show really did. I lost all my reservations and I just totally got lost in it for hours. Went back like 4 times, and then every show they did there since, it was the same thing, and. They were just like the most phenomenal things I've ever seen. I'm really excited to see if they do some more shows there. I know that they're starting to build offices there now, because I know that Freeze have moved their offices there.
Right.
And various other people, and there's like cafes with kind of fake fern plants popping up everywhere and all that kind of stuff, and like shabby chic. But that was the kind of, for me, one of those kind of apex moments where it's like, whoa, this is like what you could do with some serious money, time and space. And they all have like huge partners, these things, and they're often like collaborating with like the New Museum from New York or whatever, so it's like these very big substantial players. The Liaison did a show there as well, which was less good because there was some sculpture in it. So it kind of had some Tony cracks where we're just kind of like lying around. It's just like, I don't really understand why, but yeah. Well, so I've always really loved that kind of. It sounds quite basic in a way, but yeah, just like raw spaces. That's in like a huge concrete warehouse. Like Bold Tendencies, where I work, is a huge brutalist car park. Absinthe was just a pub, like a really run-down pub. This thing in Deptford is a warehouse. And it's just really basic, but it makes people feel comfortable, right? It's like when you go to the opera, it's not actually the opera that you're kind of feeling stuffy by. It's the fact you're in this huge theatre house with like golden ornate entablatures everywhere, and like it's often the setting that, you know, makes people feel uneasy. It's not contemporary art which is off-putting to people. It's like the framework around contemporary art which is what puts people off.
Yeah, it's elitist.
So you put some crazy stuff in a pub and people love it, you know. I remember we had a Thomas Langley in the Absinthe show, which was one of his Buy Mama House paintings. And, you know, people just got it immediately, right? They were going in there like, I really love that. That, like, speaks to me, you know. I was an adolescent in the kind of late 80s, and, like, that was the entire philosophy of, like, being brought up in a state. It was like, I'm going to work my way out of this, and I'm going to buy my mama a house. And it was just great because, you know, I doubt people had that same kind of experience when they saw it at Cobb Gallery. You know, nothing against the Cobb Gallery show. It was great, but, like, I think that you just take it, you put it somewhere else, and
disarming almost.
Yeah.
People don't have their defensive, I'm in a gallery looking at art hat on. They have I'm hanging out in a pub.
And things definitely just accrue a completely different meaning when you shift. And that's actually a really interesting thing. I think that's probably what's quite interesting about the term curator, is the idea of, okay, an artist makes work, and the artist has their idea of what it means or what it could mean or however open they might think it is. But the curator is the person that says, right, okay, well, if we put it in this gallery, it's going to mean a certain thing. But hold on, if I put it in this pub, it's going to mean a completely different thing. And then the responsibility becomes the curator's, not the artist, for how that work is received and how people look at it, what they get from it. So I think in that way, I am really interested in the term curator. I think that if a curator is someone that can basically recontextualize artworks, for people to have new experiences, sure, I'm into it.
All right. Well, another question that we ask often, because it always gives unique and very useful answers, is speaking as a curator / facilitator / connector, or whatever you would like to call yourself.
Yeah.
If you were to give a piece of advice to an early career artist for what would basically benefit them that they might not realize, what would that be?
Interesting. Well, I mean, it's tough to give an artist advice.
Advice for artists.
I once heard. I mean, this is actually like a really brutal piece of advice. It's not like a you know, oh, you should sign up to this mailing list, and you know.
Yeah.
But someone, I can't remember for the life of me who now said to, oh, maybe they didn't even say it to me. Maybe I just heard it somewhere. They said that to be an artist, being talented isn't just enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that this is, you know, not aimed at anyone in particular, but some artists are so talented, right? And you just almost feel like if you just paid a little bit more attention to your like administrative life, like you'd be killing it right now. I think that being an artist is not just like being super creative. Like there's an entire work ethic and like life that comes with being an artist. I'm not saying that you have to be like dogmatically waking up at 6 a.m. with a black coffee, doing emails, like speculatively emailing people from the crack of dawn. But, you know, I guess from the perspective of someone who facilitates or tries to facilitate artists that are actually responsive and like doing their stuff is really helpful, and you often remember that a lot, I think, as maybe people would probably not like to admit it, I think, but I think curators and, you know, curators always talk about how their perception of work changes after getting to know the artist.
Yeah.
Like big curators, I always say that they don't necessarily know the artist. They have this big institutional show, and then they get to know the artist. By the end of it, they're friends, and they look at the art in completely new ways, right? And I think that, I mean, that dribbles down to like the most basic ways. Like if you deal with people that are helpful, proactive, they want to help promote what you're doing, they want to get stuck in, like you often see their work in a different way, strangely.
Yeah.
And I think that basically the advice would be just to like think of artists as something more comprehensive than your practice.
Yeah, get better at the business.
Yeah, if you want to get good at selling your work, that's also helpful. But yeah, just like, I don't know, like, you know, just think about it in an expanded sense. Like, Billy is an artist first and foremost. He's a painter and he does resin works, and you know, he spends a lot of time just in his studio with his practice. But really, what makes Billy so successful at what he does is that any time another artist needs a hand doing something, he'll put his practice aside and work on their thing, right? Or he'll help try and put them in a show, or if he knows someone, he'll connect them. And he just works super, super hard. And all the people that I know that are successful just work really hard. It's not so much about whether they're talented or not. And that kind of comes back to what you were saying about winging it. I always feel like I'm winging it in some sense, but the only way that I kind of get through it is just by trying to like work really hard, basically. And people will recognize that more than anything else, I think.
That's very much our approach too. Like we didn't study curation. We never even really planned to become curators. We just dived in it at the deep end. All right, well, that is the end. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Done.